They found the photographs buried in a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in 15 years. Forest Service rangers discovered them by accident during a routine office relocation in 2003. Someone had labeled the manila envelope with just 3 words in faded red ink: "Do not open." Inside were 47 photographs taken at dawn on September 23, 1988. Every single image showed the same thing: perfect circles of dead earth scattered across Roan Mountain's upper meadows. Circles where nothing had grown, where nothing has grown since, where nothing will ever grow again. But here's what keeps researchers awake at night. These weren't casual snapshots. Someone had returned to these exact locations over multiple days, documenting them with the precision of a crime scene photographer. The timestamps on the backs of the photos revealed a pattern. Every image was taken at 6:17 a.m., not 6:15, not 6:20, exactly 6:17. When soil specialists finally tested these sites in 2004, they found traces of barium and aluminum oxides, chemicals that have no business existing in the ancient rocks of the southern Appalachians. The concentrations were small, precise, as if someone had measured them carefully, or as if something had been calibrated to leave exactly that signature. Then came the radiation readings. The report was classified within 48 hours. The lead scientist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, refused to discuss her findings publicly. She would say only this in a leaked email to a colleague: "The half-life doesn't match any known isotope. It's like the radiation is working backwards, getting stronger instead of decaying. That's not how physics works. That's not how anything works." Those photographs shouldn't exist because park rangers don't document empty clearings at random. They had a reason. They had seen something. And whatever they saw on Roan Mountain that September morning was disturbing. Enough that someone decided the evidence needed to be buried for a decade and a half. But the photographs are just the most recent chapter in a story that stretches back thousands of years. A story written in missing persons reports, unexplained disappearances, and the terrified journals of people who climbed too high and saw too much. Roan Mountain rises 6,285 feet above sea level, straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, like an ancient sentinel, watching over the Appalachian highlands. From a distance, it looks like any other peak in the range. Dark forests of spruce and fir climbing toward rocky summits, morning mist settling into the valleys like pools of liquid silver. But Roan Mountain is different. At the top, where visitors expect to find the wind-battered rocks and scraggly vegetation common to Appalachian peaks, they instead discover something that shouldn't exist at this elevation. Vast meadows of grass and wildflowers sprawl across the summit like transplanted prairies, covering more than 600 acres of what should be dense forest. Locals call them the balds, and they are utterly unexplainable. Scientists have spent more than a century trying to understand why these meadows exist. The elevation isn't too high for trees. Nearby peaks at similar heights support thick forests. The soil is rich and deep, perfectly capable of sustaining root systems. The climate is actually ideal for the spruce-fir forests that dominate every other mountain in the region. There are no natural fire patterns to prevent forest growth, no grazing animals in sufficient numbers to keep the trees at bay. By every measure of botany, ecology, and environmental science, these meadows should not exist. Yet they've been here for as long as humans have kept records. Longer according to pollen analysis that suggests the balds have remained treeless for at least 3,000 years, possibly much longer. When Dr. Margaret Stevenson from the University of Tennessee published her comprehensive study of the Roan balds in 1967, she concluded with unusual candor for an academic paper: "After 3 years of intensive research, I can identify no natural mechanism that would create or maintain these grasslands. Their existence contradicts our understanding of Appalachian ecology. I'm forced to conclude that factors beyond conventional environmental science may be at work." Her department chair quietly encouraged her to revise that conclusion. She refused and never received another research grant. The Cherokee people who lived in these mountains for thousands of years before European contact had their own explanation. They called the mountain Tanaha, a name that translates roughly as the place of the fabulous hawk or where the great eagle dwells, but the Cherokee weren't talking about ordinary birds. According to oral traditions preserved by tribal historians, Roan Mountain was sacred ground where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin, The mountain belonged to the Nunehai, the immortal ones, an ancient race of beings who existed before humans walked the earth. These entities lived within the mountain itself, in vast caverns that extended deeper than human miners could ever dig, in chambers where the laws of the surface world didn't always apply. The Nunehai were not gods, the Cherokee insisted, but they were not human either. They existed in a state between, capable of taking many forms. Sometimes they appeared as great birds with wingspans that blocked out the sun, sometimes as balls of light that danced across the meadows at twilight, sometimes as people who were almost, but not quite, human, beautiful and terrible to behold, with eyes that reflected starlight even in broad daylight. Cherokee medicine men would make pilgrimages to the balds for vision quests, seeking wisdom from these ancient beings. But they followed strict protocols. They would arrive at dawn and depart well before sunset. They would never eat the food that sometimes appeared unbidden in the meadows. They would never follow the lights, no matter how compelling they seemed. And they would never, under any circumstances, answer if something called to them using the voice of someone they loved. Those who broke these rules sometimes returned changed, speaking in tongues, marked by visions they could never fully describe. Others didn't return at all. The Cherokee also spoke of something else that lived on the mountain, something they wouldn't name directly, referring to it only in whispers as the thing that watches from above or the presence in the high places. This entity, they said, was older than the Nunehai, older than the mountains themselves. It had been there since before time had a name, and it would remain long after humanity had turned to dust. Do not seek its attention, Cherokee elders warned. Do not look too long at the lights in the sky above Tanaha. Do not wonder too deeply about the nature of the balds. There are things in this world that humans were not meant to fully understand, and some of them live on that mountain. When European settlers began pushing into these mountains in the late 1700s, they dismissed such warnings as primitive superstition. They were practical people, interested in land and timber and opportunity. They had no patience for ghost stories. They learned differently. David Greer was among the first wave of settlers to establish a permanent homestead near Roan Mountain. He was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, a practical man who had survived Valley Forge and 3 years of brutal combat. He feared nothing that walked on 2 legs or 4, but something about Roan Mountain terrified him. Greer's journal, preserved in the Tennessee State Archives, begins as a straightforward record of frontier life. Notations about weather, crop progress, livestock health, visits from neighbors. The handwriting is neat and controlled, the observations practical and grounded. Then the entries begin to change. August 3rd, 1782. Strange lights in the sky above the mountain tonight. 3 of them, moving in patterns no star follows. Elizabeth insists they're lanterns from other homesteads, but I know every cabin within 10 miles. Those lights are higher than any peak, and they move with purpose. August 15th, the lights again, closer this time. They descended toward the meadows at the summit, moving slowly, deliberately, as if examining the ground. The horses went wild in their corral, screaming like I've heard no horse scream before. Found one of them dead this morning. No marks, no wounds, just dead, with its eyes wide open and blood trickling from its nose. September 1st, found Henderson's bull this morning. The animal weighs near 1,000 pounds. It was 30 feet up in a pine tree, wedged in the branches like a child's toy. No earthly force could have put it there. Henderson and I tried for hours to understand it. We checked for flood signs, for storm damage, for any rational explanation. There is none. That bull walked on the ground last night. This morning it was in a tree. The animal died of terror. I could see it in its eyes. September 15th. They came to the cabin last night. I did not see them clearly. They moved in ways that hurt my eyes to follow, like watching shapes through distorted glass. But they were there. I heard them on the roof, heard their footsteps that sounded wrong, too light and too heavy at once. Elizabeth is ill with fear. The children haven't spoken since dawn. I am a God-fearing Christian man, and I have faced death in battle without flinching. But what walks these mountains at night is neither God's creation nor the devil's. It is something else entirely, and I fear for my immortal soul just knowing it exists. October 7th. We are leaving. I don't care about the land, the cabin, the year's work we're abandoning. I won't spend another night here. Last evening, little Sarah was playing outside when I heard her laughing and talking. When I went to check on her, she was sitting in the dirt having a conversation with empty air. "I'm talking to the tall man," she told me. "He says his name is difficult in our words. He says he's been here since before the trees learned to grow. He wants to know if we'll stay." When I grabbed her and brought her inside, she started screaming. She screamed for 6 hours straight. Her voice gave out before her terror did. We leave at first light. David Greer's final entry is dated October 8, 1782. We made it to the Johnsons' place 12 miles east. Sarah has stopped screaming but won't speak. She just draws pictures in the dirt with a stick, strange symbols that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. Elizabeth says we should burn the drawings. I think she's right. Some knowledge isn't meant for human minds. If anyone reading this considers settling near Roan Mountain, heed my warning. The Cherokee are right to fear that place. There are watchers on that mountain, and they take interest in those who come too close. The Greer family never returned. The cabin stood empty for 3 months, until another family, the Wisemans, moved in. They lasted 6 weeks. Martha Wiseman's account, given years later to relatives in Johnson City, Tennessee, is even more disturbing than Greer's journal. She spoke of her daughter Sarah, a different Sarah, no relation to the Greer child, who began waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every morning. The girl would sit up in bed, fully asleep, and carry on conversations with someone invisible. Martha would listen from the doorway, afraid to interrupt, as her daughter spoke in her normal voice, asking questions and then pausing as if listening to responses. "The man says the mountain is lonely," Sarah said one night. "He says people used to understand them better back before. He says we forgot the old agreements. He says they miss when humans would come to talk instead of just taking the trees and the stones." "What man, sweetheart?" Martha whispered. Sarah's head swiveled toward her mother with mechanical precision, though the child's eyes remained closed. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, emotionless. "The tall gray man who smells like copper and speaks in colors. He says you can see him if you choose to, but most people's minds break when they do. He says you should be grateful for your blindness." Martha Wiseman shook her daughter awake. Sarah had no memory of the conversation. Within a week, the girl fell ill with a mysterious wasting disease. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, and stopped responding to any stimulus. The local doctor could find nothing physically wrong with her, but Sarah was clearly dying. Her skin took on a grayish pallor. Her eyes, when she occasionally opened them, seemed to be looking at something far away, something that terrified her beyond the capacity for screaming. The Wisemans packed their belongings and fled the homestead, carrying Sarah on a stretcher between them. Remarkably, the girl began to recover as soon as they crossed a creek about 5 miles from Roan Mountain. By the time they reached Johnson City, her color had returned, her appetite was normal, and she was talking again. But she refused to speak about what she had seen during her illness. The one time her father pressed her, she turned to him with an expression of profound sadness and said, "I saw where they live, Papa. Inside the mountain, in the spaces between spaces. It's beautiful and terrible, and we're so small compared to them. They're not evil, but they don't think the way we do. To them, we're like the way we think about ants or mice. Interesting sometimes, inconvenient other times, occasionally useful. They were trying to teach me things, but my brain couldn't hold it. It was like trying to pour an ocean into a cup." The pattern repeated throughout the early settlement period. Families would arrive, drawn by tales of fertile valleys and unlimited timber. Within weeks or months they would leave, speaking in hushed tones about lights in the sky, voices from empty forests, time that moved strangely, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by something vast and inhuman. By 1800, an informal understanding had developed among the mountain communities. Roan was different. You could hunt on its lower slopes if necessary. You could cross it during daylight if you had to, but you didn't homestead there. You didn't stay after dark, and you absolutely did not go to the bulls unless you wanted to risk becoming another cautionary tale, whispered around winter fires. The Civil War brought chaos to the Appalachians, and in that chaos, the mountain claimed more victims. In September 1864, a Confederate patrol unit consisting of 12 men was pursuing Union scouts across the lower slopes of Roan Mountain. The rebels were seasoned fighters from the 58th North Carolina Infantry, veterans who knew these mountains intimately. They were tracking 5 Union scouts who had been mapping passages through the range for Sherman's planned campaigns. According to the after-action report filed by Captain James Morrison of the Union forces, his scouts successfully eluded the Confederate patrol by ascending into the rhododendron thickets below the balds. They hid in the dense undergrowth, waiting for the rebels to pass. But the Confederate patrol never emerged from the thicket. Morrison and his men waited through the night, expecting to be discovered or to see the rebels give up and withdraw. As dawn broke on September 18th, they cautiously entered the thicket where they had seen the Confederate soldiers disappear. What they found defied explanation. The rebels' rifles were arranged in a perfect circle in a small clearing, standing upright with their bayonets driven into the ground. In the exact center of the circle sat 12 haversacks, 12 canteens, 12 cartridge boxes, and 12 pairs of boots. Every piece of equipment was present and accounted for, but the men themselves had vanished completely. Morrison's report, preserved in the National Archives, describes the scene with the detached precision of a trained military observer. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away from the circle. The arrangement of equipment suggests deliberate placement rather than the chaos of combat or capture. Most disturbing were the boots. Each pair was positioned as if the wearer had simply stepped out of them and vanished into air. One pair still had the laces tied. A massive search involving both Union and Confederate forces, the commanders temporarily setting aside hostilities in face of a deeper mystery, found no trace of the missing men. They searched for 6 days, covering every ravine, cave, and hollow within 10 miles. They never found a single body, not one shred of uniform fabric. No bones, no graves, no evidence the men had ever existed beyond their equipment, arranged in that inexplicable circle. But Morrison's report contained one more detail that was quietly removed from the official records. My scouts reported seeing lights in the sky on the night of September 17th, multiple lights descending toward the mountain's summit. The lights moved in formation, maintaining perfect spacing, descending slowly as if lowering on invisible cables. Where they touched the mountain, the trees seemed to bend away as if repelled by their presence. The lights remained for approximately 2 hours before ascending again. The Confederate patrol entered the thicket shortly before the lights appeared. We heard no screams, no shots, no sounds of distress, only silence, as if the mountain had simply swallowed them whole. The Union Army classified Morrison's full report. It remained sealed until 1968, when a graduate student stumbled across it while researching Civil War movements in Tennessee. By then, Morrison had been dead for nearly 80 years, unable to answer questions about what he had truly witnessed that September night on Roan Mountain. The post-war period brought industrialization to Appalachia, and with it came the lumber companies. The vast forests of old-growth hardwood that covered these mountains represented millions of dollars in potential profit. The Roan Mountain Lumber Company, financed by Scottish investors who had never seen the Appalachians, began operations in 1885. For 3 years, everything went smoothly. They built a narrow-gauge railroad up Burbank Creek, established a thriving lumber camp at the base of the mountain, and began harvesting the virgin timber that had stood untouched for millennia. The company employed over 200 men and was rapidly becoming one of the most profitable operations in the region. Then the loggers reached the upper elevations. Thomas Pritchard had worked as a timber cruiser for the company since 1886. His job was to venture ahead of the cutting crews, marking trees for harvest and scouting the best routes for the railroad. He was experienced, level-headed, and known for his practical, no-nonsense approach to the work. On September 3, 1888, Pritchard was working alone near the tree line, marking a stand of ancient spruce that would yield premium lumber. It was mid-afternoon, the weather clear and calm, visibility perfect, according to his sworn statement, given 3 days later to company officials. He had just finished marking a particularly fine specimen when the air in front of him began to shimmer. It looked like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone, Pritchard testified. But the air was cool and I was standing in the shade. The shimmer grew stronger, more defined, until I was looking at what I can only describe as a window or doorway in the very air itself. Through this distortion, Pritchard claimed to see another place entirely. Not a different part of the mountain, not a view obscured by mist or distance, but an utterly alien landscape that couldn't exist on Earth. "The sky was wrong," he said, his voice shaking even days later. "Purple, shot through with veins of color I don't have names for. The light came from multiple sources, casting shadows in directions that made my eyes hurt. The ground was red stone, smooth as glass, stretching to a horizon that curved upward instead of down. And there were structures, buildings, I suppose, though they didn't look built so much as grown. They rose from the stone in spirals and loops, defying gravity, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of frozen light." Pritchard stood transfixed, unable to move, unable to look away. He estimated the vision lasted perhaps 10 or 15 seconds, though he couldn't be certain. Time felt elastic, unreliable. Then something in that alien landscape noticed him. "I felt its attention," Pritchard said, "like a physical weight pressing against my mind. Whatever it was, it turned toward me. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was aware of me watching. It began moving toward the doorway, and I finally found the strength to run." Pritchard fled down the mountain, leaving his equipment behind. He ran until his legs gave out, and then he crawled. Other loggers found him hours later, more than 2 miles from where he'd been working, unconscious beside a creek. He had apparently tried to drink and collapsed. When they revived him, his hair had turned completely white. At age 32, Thomas Pritchard looked 60. The company doctor examined him and found him severely dehydrated despite lying beside running water. His pupils were different sizes and didn't react normally to light. His hands trembled uncontrollably whenever he tried to describe what he'd seen. The company might have dismissed Pritchard's account as sunstroke or mental collapse, except that within the next week, 6 more loggers reported similar experiences. All described seeing what they called doorways or windows opening in the air. All described glimpsing impossible landscapes beyond. All reported the overwhelming sensation of being watched by vast, incomprehensible intelligences. When Foreman James McCoy rode up the mountain to investigate these claims personally, the company made the decision to suspend operations. McCoy was a skeptic, a practical Scotsman who believed in hard work and hard liquor, and very little else. He would sort out this nonsense about doorways and alien landscapes. McCoy disappeared on September 14, 1888. His horse returned to camp alone, wild-eyed and lathered with sweat. A search party found McCoy's body 3 days later, 4 miles from where he had last been seen. He was lying in a meadow, positioned flat on his back with his arms at his sides and his eyes wide open. Staring at the sky, the county coroner, Dr. Francis Webb, performed the autopsy in the lumber camp's main building. His report, filed with Mitchell County, North Carolina, is a masterpiece of medical bewilderment. The deceased presents with massive internal injuries inconsistent with external trauma. Every organ shows signs of severe compression damage, as if subjected to extreme pressure. The pattern of injury suggests the victim fell from a tremendous height. I would estimate at least 200 feet, possibly more. However, there are no corresponding external injuries, no broken bones, no contusions, no abraded skin. The body's exterior is entirely intact, while the interior has been essentially pulverized. I have never seen anything like this in 30 years of medical practice. I cannot explain it. I can only document it. The report continues with increasingly disturbed observations. More peculiar still, the victim's blood shows unusual properties. When placed under microscopic examination, the blood cells appear to have been exposed to radiation or some form of energy I cannot identify. Additionally, the victim's eyes, which remained open post-mortem, have suffered damage to the retinas consistent with staring at an extremely bright light source. Yet there are no burns or other evidence of light exposure. Dr. Webb's final note suggests a man at the limits of his scientific understanding. In my professional opinion, the cause of death was massive internal trauma resulting from an extreme pressure event. The mechanism of this trauma is beyond my ability to determine. I would recommend against further investigation of the area where the body was found, as I fear for the safety of anyone who might experience whatever James McCoy experienced. The Roan Mountain Lumber Company withdrew from the mountain in October 1888. They abandoned thousands of dollars worth of equipment, left their railroad to rust and never returned. The Scottish investors sold the company at a loss the following year. To this day, hikers occasionally stumble across remnants of the abandoned operation. sections of railway track disappearing into overgrown forest, pieces of rusted equipment scattered through the undergrowth. But some of these artifacts display strange properties. The metal is sometimes twisted in ways that metallurgists say shouldn't be possible, without simultaneous application of extreme heat and pressure. Tools have been found melted partially into stone, as if they had become momentarily liquid and then resolved. Railroad ties show burn patterns that spread from the inside out. Whatever happened on Roan Mountain in 1888 left permanent scars on the landscape and in the collective memory of the region. The mountain's reputation as a place of danger and mystery was firmly established. Sensible people avoided it when possible, but people are rarely entirely sensible, especially when curiosity and scientific ambition are involved. The early 20th century brought a new breed of visitor to Roan Mountain. Scientists, botanists and researchers drawn by the bald's unique ecology and the persistent rumors of anomalous phenomena. These were educated people, skeptical of superstition, armed with instruments and the scientific method. They would document, measure and explain the mountain's mysteries. Many would come to regret their confidence,